One of the things that's most interesting to me is, as an aviation geek, as an aviation nerd, is if you were to say to an average individual or maybe a commercial pilot, a lot of commercial pilots listen to this podcast, as I'm sure they listen to yours, and they were to see something. What is your first step? I mean, what do people do? And it could be I'm even on the ground witnessing some sort of phenomenon, but in particular in the air. Just take it from that perspective. I'm flying along the coast of California, not far from warning area off the coast of Catalina. I see something. What do I do?
Well, you do what you should always do as a pilot, which is aviate, navigate, and communicate. You shouldn't necessarily let yourself be distracted by what you're seeing. At this point in the game, right, you don't know what this object is. It's probably more likely just a balloon or a UAV or something of that nature. And so the idea here is if you see something that's unidentified, that you should now, go deviate from your course to go inspect or something like that, right? So that's not what's being communicated here. You should be a professional pilot if you do observe it and you believe it could be a threat to other air traffic. The proper procedure would be to reach out to your air traffic controller and see if that traffic is known. And if not, you'd like to give them a position where it is so they can warn other traffic about it. One thing I've been hearing from talking with commercial pilots is that essentially what's been happening right now is that they'll see something either at their altitude or in the vicinity of their altitude. Other aircraft are seeing it as well, and they're calling up the ATC, and they're all kind of confirming it that it's there and that they don't know what it is, and they can visually see it, but there's nothing else really to do at that point. Right. So that's part of the problem I've been trying to resolve, is that there is no real mechanism to report this, both from a military perspective as well as a commercial perspective. On the military perspective, just pointing to see, we didn't really have the ability to report unknown objects in any way that would have got resolved. It was simply, we had the Navy Aviation Safety reporting mechanisms, and those are, not an investigatory type of system.
It's ASAP reports.
Yeah. So, it's data collection after the fact. So there really was nothing. And if those represented, potentially adversarial platforms, that was ultimately my fear at the time, was that these could have potentially been some type of platform that's spying on us. And that's something I've been communicating a bit on. I'm getting off track here, so I'll jump back. On the commercial side, what should the pilots do? Right now, in the FAR, the Federal Aviation Regulations, I believe it is, it instructs aircrew, if they would like to report one of these, they don't require it in any way. They essentially suggest that the aircrew or the witness could go report that to any number of quote unquote UFO reporting centers that are out in the general public, none of which are well funded or consistent with each other, and so more or less information just gets scattered out. And so that's one of the issues that I'm working to resolve from a procedural point with the AIAA to be able to make those recommendations, but also with the other organization I started, Americans for Safe Aerospace, where we can provide general education and education on Capitol Hill to be able to push for those procedures, be able to push for that, potentially mandatory reporting, so that pilots don't feel like they can't bring that information forward to ATC. Right. And also,
Is it? I mean, there's a stigma in aviation. You do something. There's a pilot deviation. The air traffic controllers. Here's a phone number to call. What you're supposed to write down right after you had some incident. Is there a sense that like pilots are not reporting because they're going to get on some list with Will Smith's going to come up and do some clicking to them, or that the FAA is going to pull their ticket, they can't fly anymore on the commercial side? Is there concerns about that?
I don't think it's anything Men in Black nefarious, but guys just generally don't want to be associated with it. They don't want to answer for it. They'd rather keep their head down. And, I say that from the context of the people that have been calling me for the past, 8 months or more. Yeah. That's what they're reporting. And when they first reached out to me, some of the stories where guys didn't even want to call it out to ATC because they didn't want their call sign associated with that report, essentially. So that's where the state of affairs was. Of course, it's not evenly spread, but I hear that's better now. People are calling it out more. But it was disappointing to see that during the NASA Independent Study Team public meeting, that the FAA representative communicated that he wasn't even aware of any procedures for pilots to report on this.
That's like one of the worst things, right? Yeah, they seem to be good at, kind of punishing pilots. And if the FAA is out there, please do not, pull my ticket. Ariel, we talked over lunch not too long ago about, events, things you saw when you were in combat or in training. You're flying a Super Hornet also. Were you both single-seat pilots? Was it both single-seat aircraft, or do you guys double?
I was single-seat. Ryan flew two-seaters.
You told me once, and maybe you could tell the story about your encounter with a UAP at the time. Can you actually?
No. I, in both cases, it was observable for me, so I didn't have anything too crazy. One time in the Whiskey areas off the coast of Virginia, we did pick up a lot of little like scatter, and I was able to lock onto this, and it ended up I did a right to right with a balloon. There was another time in the Persian Gulf, and this was more worrisome because I'm coming off the carrier. I pick up a contact going real slow, not getting called out from air traffic at the boat. Lock him up. I have a 9X missile, which has another sensor on it, and that actually gets tone, which tells me there's something there. End up doing a right to right with a Iranian drone.
Yeah, right to right means you're squaring off. Sort of.
Basically, we just kind of flew right by. Yeah, so it was an Iranian drone that was orbiting near the carrier. Dangerous from a standpoint of, one, we should be aware that it's there, which the boat may have been. It was just more warning the pilots, hey,
And I remember reading in Donald Rumsfeld's biography, of all places, that he said once that if President Bush wanted to kill somebody, it took about 17 different phone calls and telegrams and encrypted data sources before that person would meet his untimely, his or her. We should be inclusive. a lot of worrisome women out there, right? What about that? If you saw this, you identify it as some threat from a hostile nation. Do you have authorization? You have tone. You said that means. By the way, we should. Although you and I are aviation nerds, and Ryan is as well. What is lock on? What kind of sensor technology are we talking about? These are radar sensors or a FLIR. What are they exactly?
Radar usually is the first sensor you're going to use. That's kind of your broadest. That's going to pick up the most. Everything else starts to zero in. So in that case, I was coming off the boat, and we have to do checks on our system. So that's why I use the 9X.
And that's a
Sidewinder missile. It's a heat. It looks for heat sources. Even at that point, my aircraft's safe. There's no way for me to shoot this missile. I have no intention to do that. To broader on your question, we would have to have, there are rules of engagement that are very clear that dictate how you can employ your weapon systems. And with it being a peacetime scenario, unless that drone fired upon me or was looking to be a threat to U.S. forces, there's nothing I would really legally be able to do. And then we're hamstrung pretty tightly with the ROE, but it also allows you to keep yourself safe. But unfortunately, we're not in hostilities at that, or fortunately, we're not in hostilities. So
right. Well, yeah.